I absolutely love this Canadian cat, whose videos are few and far between, but always are brilliant and well sourced. If anyone can contact her, please ask her to call me. This piece on the Finders is very well put together, although brief for its topic. The global scourge of these vicious crimes against helpless children must be stopped. Whatever we can do, no matter how extreme, must be done on their behalf. In such cases, the end justifies whatever means are necessary. We won't stop it, but we can send recidivism rates to zero. The following video is reposted as a public service. Please use the link below to subscribe to the Truth Factory.
Welcome back to the Truth Factory. The recent media exposure of the NXIVM cult and Jeffrey Epstein's crimes have begun to shed light in the mainstream on the clandestine organizations operating within our society that prey upon minors. But decades before these stories broke headlines, there was another similarly devious and mysterious group in the 1980s known as the Finders cult. It's been suggested that this was a satanic child trafficking network, possibly tied to and protected by the CIA, and to this day there are still far more questions than answers about the Finders. The information that I'm about to share with you in this video is not a wacky conspiracy theory. All of this comes directly from the pages of police reports, newly released FBI files, and accounts taken from witnesses, investigators, and members of the cult themselves. But as a warning, this story is very disturbing. Let's begin. In the afternoon of February 4th, 1987, the Tallahassee Police Department responded to an anonymous tip that two well-dressed men driving a blue van were spotted at a local park escorting 6 disheveled-looking children. According to a witness, the men, who were potentially high on drugs, were looking for a park with a swimming pond to bathe the visibly filthy children. The children, 2 girls and 4 boys ranging in ages from 2 to 6 years old, were very dirty and unkempt, with bug bites on their entire body and scratches on their legs. When police arrived, the men Michael Hallwell and Douglas Ammerman claimed to be teachers traveling to Mexico to start a school for brilliant children. When they were asked about the parents of the children, Ammerman became very evasive and stated that the children's parents were in D.C. Hallwell refused to give any information and then pretended to faint when he was told that he was under arrest for child abuse due to neglect. He also later laid down in his holding cell, just jerking his body and refusing to open his eyes. Hallwell also had with him 2 copies of Miranda rights forms, one of which stated, "I have nothing to hide," and the other with, "I have something to hide." According to the New York Times, witnesses told investigators that they had seen 2 other men and children in a second van make contact with the first group in the park, but that they had driven away before the police arrived.
It was just 2 of you?
No, there were actually the 2 of us who were arrested, plus a second van with 3 or 4 other men from the Finders. So there were actually 2 vans traveling together. The other 3 or 4 men were in Tallahassee looking for work, while Danny and I were on a camping trip with the kids, because the idea was to have the kids be in nature. So we were in some kind of a state park outside of Tallahassee, and living kind of this kind of babysitting. Babysitting I believe there
6 kids you had, is what they said.
Yeah, there was Mary and Max and Ben and BB and Honeybee and John Paul. My son was the youngest.
By the next morning, the Tallahassee police confirmed that the men were a part of a group called the Finders. U.S. District Court records described them as a Washington-based cult that conducted brainwashing techniques at a warehouse in D.C. A source talks about being recruited by the cult with promises of sexual gratification and financial reward, and was invited by one member to explore Satanism with them. On police inspection of a men's foul-smelling blue van, the police find knives, a Chinese-English dictionary, a U.S. passport, a pack of Trojan condoms, a bag containing photos of children, some nude, as well as 20 floppy disks, a TRS-80 computer, and a device that could be hooked into a telephone line for computer transmission. It's important to note that this was all, of course, prior to the internet, and at the time it was still fairly uncommon for even private citizens to own a computer, let alone numerous ones in other state-of-the-art technologies. The system was used by the cult leader Marion Petty to give various missions to the traveling members to carry out, which were known to the group as games. This is why Marion Petty went by the alias, the Game Caller. One of the messages allegedly told the men to use the Mexican school cover story if caught by the police. Although obviously if you need a cover story or are afraid of being caught by the police, it's probably because you're engaging in illegal activities. After the police had placed the children in custody, they received half a dozen calls threatening the children, including a bomb threat. At this point, the children had been moved to an undisclosed location and placed under the watch of an armed guard for their protection. According to reports, the children urinated and defecated on the floor during the police interviews, and they were all extremely hungry. One of the girls claimed that they only ate raw food and that food was only given to them as a reward. The children also appeared to be unaware of basic household innovations like television, telephones, hot water, electricity, and even toilets, which is a stark contrast to the adult members' use of high-tech equipment. Included in the Virginia affidavit were statements from the children made to the Tallahassee authorities. The oldest child, Mary, stated, "Mr. Petty tells everyone what to do. He is in charge. The children are made to sleep outside of the house and the moms are allowed to sleep inside the house. Men come and visit the moms, and they sleep inside also." Mary also stated that the children were guarded at night and that Mr. Petty is fat and owns a man named Steve. Mary went on to claim that they were being weaned from their mothers and that the two men, Hollowell and Ammerman, teach them games and how to read. When asked what kind of games they play, the children described one game as taking off the men's clothes, putting them on, and then going through the pockets for money. Mary claimed that at Christmas time, the women had come down the stairs with no clothes on, and the children believed that this was another game. When Mary was questioned about sexual abuse, she became very evasive and fidgety. She said there were, quote, "no bad touches between the children and adults." However, an official with the Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services reported that the two children were confirmed cases of sexual abuse based on physical examination.
Nonsense. The two oldest children were Mary and Max, and they would make stuff up, make up stories, probably trying to get sympathy so they could get some candy.
Also, something odd is that one of the young boys, Max, stated that everything they had belonged to Mr. Reagan. Now, Ronald Reagan was the president at this time, and I'm unsure if this was a reference to him, but the Finders spokesman, Robert Gardner Terrell, did show up to a small press conference at the time wearing a Ronald Reagan mask. Whether that's relevant, I don't know, but it is weird. While all of this was happening, a police officer who was also a part-time student named Robert Sorkin found a computer at a phone booth at his university campus and decided to take it home. He figured out how to run it, and then he read the documents on it in hopes of determining the owner. It turns out that the computer was either accidentally or purposely left at the campus by other members of the Finders group, and the messages on it contained the names of the investigating officers on the Finders case. At this point, Tallahassee enforcement officials and U.S. Customs have deep suspicions that the children could likely have been kidnapped with an attempt to traffic them across the border. So they contact the D.C. police, who are already well aware of the Finders, as they have already been investigating them for almost a year, after an informant had given them information regarding a cult that engaged in blood rituals and sexual orgies involving children. One witness says that she was given a room by the Finders, and during the night she was summoned to the attic by one female member of the cult for purposes of engaging in sex with Redacted. On another instance, she stated that she spent the night in the warehouse and was subjected to watching sexual intercourse between Redacted and male members of the cult. It goes on to claim that when she tried to leave the cult, the members burned down her place of dwelling.
But the fun part for me was the sexual part. I like the part about sexual sharing because there was totally open sexuality.
Wow.
Another instance involves police witnessing well-dressed men driving luxury cars entering the Finders' dingy property in a bad neighborhood late at night, and in the early hours of the morning with children. On one occasion, after midnight, the police stopped a man in a van with a child who claimed that he was babysitting for diplomats. This hints at a possible honeypot ring similar to Jeffrey Epstein's. In an interview conducted by We've Read the Documents with former Finders investigator and ex-CIA officer Skip Clements, he states the following.
Yeah, I mean, they did everything they could to try and keep the thing quiet because of, I will tell you that we were told basically that the reason that the whole Finders issue was started and that the reason that they had it located there was that they were using the children to compromise visiting diplomats. And although that's probably one of the most disgusting things that you'd ever want to hear, it turned out to be true. And, otherwise, why would the agency be going in there? Or they're claiming that they were rogue agents that were doing this. But the fact is, why?
The police were also aware of an unsolved murder in which the finders may have been involved. The murder victim may have been Barbara Sylvester Matea, who, according to FBI documents, tried to leave the cult but was physically restrained by them. She allegedly got appendicitis, and the cult refused to allow her to seek medical attention, and she died. Yet there was no report of the day of her death and no investigation into it by the police.
The police were aware of us. They couldn't figure out what we were doing. We'd bought this 10,000 square foot warehouse, and we would sometimes appear there in the middle of the night, and it just didn't fit any pattern. So they had already broken into the warehouse to try to figure out what was going on. And they had drilled a hole through the wall of the building next door so that they could see the second floor of the warehouse. And so the police, peeking through this peephole in the wall, concluded that we were filming pornographic stuff.
The arrests of the men in the park were now enough to give DC police probable cause to obtain search warrants for the finders' locations. On February 5th, Virginia State Police searched the game caller's 90-acre farm. Neighbors of the farm say crying children were often brought there in vans. An FBI report states that, quote, evidence of a satanic cult ritual was discovered. The same report notes that all reports regarding the finders are now to be classified secret. There was also information that bodies were buried on the farm, but excavation revealed nothing. However, cages were discovered on the premises in which witnesses revealed that they were used to keep children in during their visits to the farm. So at this time, the customs agents and the DC police also raid the finders' home and their warehouse that is located just down the street from the White House. The group centered themselves in a 2-story colonial-style home. Neighbors said that a number of people had visited the area saying that they were looking for the Chinese embassy. Neighbors also stated that they never saw children at the home during the 3 years that they had lived in the neighborhood, but that there were lots of pregnant women and couples. On more than one occasion, neighbors stumbled upon young tourists claiming that the finder's address was being advertised in Europe as a youth hostel. When police investigated the warehouse, they noted that it contained a library containing books pertaining to mind control and a video room, which seemed to be set up as an indoctrination center with high-tech video equipment. And to me, this evidence perhaps hints at MKUltra experimentation. There also appeared to be an altar set up, as well as many jars of urine and feces. The police removed large plastic bags filled with color slide photographs. The photos included naked children and children in chains, as well as what looked like children engaging in sacrificial rituals. An album labeled The Execution of Henrietta and Igor showed children slaughtering and mutilating 2 goats while adults in white robes watched. It included a child crying, holding a decapitated goat head, and in one picture titled Ben Finds Henrietta's Womb, showed children opening up a pregnant goat's stomach and playing with its fetus.
But one of the things they found was a photo album entitled The Execution of Henrietta and Igor.
Right, those were our goats. Those were our pet goats. That was a theatrical thing. We did keep 2 goats over a summer, and then it was time to, they're not going to survive the winter because we're not around all the time, so we killed them and ate them. We ate the goats, which is a legal thing to do. But the 2 men, Danny and Stan, who did that, decided to do a little dress-up fun thing and make it an experience for the children. Like, here's these 3 and 4 and 5-year-old kids. We're going to show you what happens to animals before you eat them. This is education. You eat meat, right? Well, this is how meat is made. You kill an animal.
There was also a substantial amount of computer equipment and documents purportedly containing instructions for obtaining children for unspecified purposes. The instructions allegedly included the impregnation of female members of the community, purchasing children, trading children, and kidnapping them. There was also evidence of high-tech international transfers of currency, as well as numerous files relating to the finders' activities from many trafficking vulnerable countries around the world. one foreign electronic message specifically ordered the purchase of 2 children in Hong Kong to be arranged through a contact in the Chinese embassy there. Perhaps this would explain why there was an English to Chinese dictionary found in the finder's van. Other documents identify numerous properties under the control of the finders and documents that showed that they had a keen interest in terrorism, explosives, and the evasion of law enforcement. There was also allegedly one file entitled Pentagon Break-In. In this computer room, there was a detailed summary of the arrest that had taken place the previous night and a set of instructions which appeared to be broadcast via a computer network which advised participants to keep moving the children through different jurisdictions and instructions on how to avoid police attention. It's also important to note that the warehouse site already had a previous intel inquiry involving classified maps of an underground tunnel/sewer system. Why this map was classified, I don't know, but this perhaps hints at smuggling around Washington, D.C. and beyond. In fact, police spokesman Scott Hunt states that the finders may have been, quote, accustomed to selling or smuggling the children of its members out of the country. However, the police investigation into the finders' cult appears to have been quickly taken over by the FBI. Despite everything they found, the search warrant was shut down on the first day, and a subsequent FBI walkthrough examined no evidence. A customs agent interested in building a case concerning possible Export Neutrality Act, Mann Act, and child pornography violations was denied access to the evidence and was told that the finders' organization had become an internal matter. Later, there would be denial that any of the previous listed evidence even existed. There are also numerous redactions involving what was found and the people and agencies involved. Any report by doctors that mentioned sexual abuse was omitted from the final MPD report, which had just been classified secret and now was not available to review. So just 5 days after the 2 men were arrested in the park, the child abuse charges were dropped, and the 6 children were returned to the women claiming to be their biological mothers, who were also cult members. Any wrongdoing by this group had seemingly been completely erased. The whole thing was chalked up to a misunderstanding and satanic panic, which was a paranoia of satanic cults that had gripped the United States at this time. However, if there was really no fire to all of this smoke in this case, why would the evidence be classified as secret? This has all of the hallmarks of an obvious cover-up, especially when reading this report stating, no information was turned over to the FBI WFO for investigation, and the WFO would not be advised of the redacted involvement/contact. As far as known, no details of redacted involvement has ever become public. I'm just guessing that what is redacted is the CIA. This is likely because the finders' cult had CIA connections, and the FBI had actually been in contact with the finders since 1971. At the very least, it was confirmed years later in a DOJ probe that several members of the finders were employed at a firm called Future Enterprises that provided computer training to CIA officers. And even more damning is a customs report that revealed that the CIA admitted to owning the finders' organization as a front for a domestic computer training operation. Even a decade later, Future Enterprises would have a contract with the Defense Intelligence Agency and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which was the same organization that employed Finders member Michael Hallwell. Now, the CIA links alone would be a conflict of interest, which may have led to an impediment of local law enforcement's investigation into the finders. But the CIA connections actually run a lot deeper than just Future Enterprises, as the finders cult had access to Andrews Air Force Base and were able to get a military ride to China whenever they wanted. In fact, the finders were able to visit restricted countries like Moscow, North Korea, and North Vietnam from the late 1950s to the mid-1970s, at a time of hostility which could only have been arranged by the CIA. It has also been widely reported that Petty was a retired Air Force Master Sergeant who spent years rubbing elbows with the top brass in the United States intelligence community. In a rare 1998 interview, Marion Petty, the game caller, hinted at some members being involved in the CIA. This included Marion Petty's wife Isabel, who was employed by the CIA from 1950 to 1971. Marion Petty's son also worked for Air America, which has faced many allegations of being a CIA front used to smuggle drugs.
He was a very straight, good-looking, 6-foot young man, and he was part of that organization, which put him in the Pentagon every day.
Do you know what his rank was?
I believe he was a master sergeant when he retired. And his wife, Isabel Petty, worked for the CIA. So that also adds to the conspiracy theories.
Right.
They say that, I don't know this, that apparently Petty could ask her to like check on things or look things up, or maybe, you know, bring him documents if he wanted to know something. So he might have had access to some classified materials at times.
This is where Ted Gunderson comes in. He was a high-up FBI special agent. In his career, he had been the head of the FBI for Memphis, Dallas, and Los Angeles, and after he retired, Gunderson later moved into private investigating involving child trafficking and satanic cults, including the Finders. Gunderson believed that the Finders were involved in an international trafficking ring linked directly to Washington, D.C. and the CIA, and that it may have not only been a sex ring but a drug paraphernalia ring spanning many third world and modernized countries. According to Ted Gunderson's report, the Finders were a CIA front established in the 1960s. Members are specifically trained government kidnappers with top clearance and protection in their assigned task of stealing children, torturing, and sexually abusing them, sometimes involving them in satanic orgies, blood rituals, and murder of the children with the slaughter of animals. The report goes on to state that the Finders are known sexual degenerates who use a fleet of unmarked cars to grab targeted children from parks and schoolyards, many times using their own child members as decoys. They lure the innocent children away from the crowd close to their vans. The adults inside grab the children, drug them, and transport them to a series of safe houses where they await their ill-fated end. The children are then sold as sex slaves, auctioned off at various locations in the Northern Hemisphere. In a rare interview, Ted Gunderson describes the auctioning of the children.
And these children are being kidnapped off the streets, and I have documentation that an organization known as the Finders out of Washington, D.C. has, since the early 1960s, been actively involved in kidnapping children off the street, okay? Now, unfortunately, as a result of some of my research, I learned through a U.S. Customs Treasury Department report that the Finders is a CIA covert operation.
So why do they want these kids? What do they do?
The kids are auctioned off. I talked to one of my sources told me he's attended 6 auctions where kids were being auctioned off. He was part of the network, and there were as few as 6 and as many as 36 children that were auctioned off. They were each auctioned off for up to $50,000 each. The children are ages 2 to 21, boys and girls. They put a label, a number around their neck, tie a string around their neck and put a card with a number on it. They bid, they put them up on the stage, they bid on the number. The kids come out, they put them in an airplane. There's one base a small field about 50 miles out of Las Vegas, Nevada, which is where some of the auctions are taking place. Put them on an airplane, the kids leave, they disappear. Then the kids are all doped up, of course. They put them in campers. The kids are, once they're in the camper, they dope them up, they're sleeping. The police stop them, they say, my kid's asleep, leave them alone, and all that sort of thing. And they use these kids for sex slaves, they use them for body parts, and they use them for their sacrifices.
Now, Gunderson filed multiple complaints to the FBI about the Finders that were completely ignored, and the story of what happened fell down the memory hole. To this day, the Finders Call deny all allegations of satanic activity and child trafficking, and they do their best to explain away the whole debacle and all the evidence as trumped-up media sensationalism linked to the satanic panic of the late 1980s.
Nonsense. The 2 oldest children were Mary and Max, and they would make up stories.
There was no child molestation, there was no trafficking children. That was a complete fantasy, fiction.
Although it's important to note here that the game caller outright counseled his accolades on the art of deception and trained them to spread misinformation. So in this situation, it's difficult to take the word of the deceptive cult members over the overwhelming evidence found in the original police reports and from witness testimonies. It seems far more likely here that this was a massive cover-up of sorts, perhaps linked to the highest levels of government, just as the Jeffrey Epstein case had originally been dismissed due to him supposedly being linked to intelligence as well. I'll also note that there were accusations that some members of the Finders, including Marion Petty, were pedophiles, and decades later one Finders member was convicted for distributing child pornography. It's also been alleged that spokesperson Robert Gardner Terrell was in bed with both the CIA and the Mossad through future enterprises. All Finders members who left the cult feared that harm would come to them if they spoke out against the cult or the game caller. Of course, it's a lot easier to pretend that these stories are just conspiracy theories because no one actually wants to believe that it's possible for a government-linked child trafficking operation like these to exist. But the Finders cult and many other stories like it shed a glimpse into how dark and deep the swamp really is. It's a huge red pill that you just can't unswallow. But you don't have to take my word for it. Read the police reports and the FBI documents and decide for yourself. Links in the description. Have a great night. Ew.
Please subscribe to our backup channels. Net4Truth USA 2 Patriot channel, BitChute.com/net4Truth USA, and drop.space/@Net4Truth USA. We fly so close to the target, we are on our 5th fighter jet. We will be relentless and persistent until the enemies of freedom are defeated. You can support this channel by using the links in the description, but for a $100 donation, I will personally send you a autographed hardcover special edition copy of Land of Childhood's Fears. Also, visit my bookstore at lulu.com/net4truth USA. If you are viewing this video on BitChute, you can use the links in the description to support us, or simply click the green $ dot on our video to support this channel. Thank you. Links are in the description section.